Hello comic book fans, it is Comic Load Wednesday. Every Wednesday I'm going to be talking about a bunch of different comic books that are somewhat miscellaneous that I don't do individual videos on. I read a lot of different comic books, some of which I feel like they need individual videos all on themselves, but I also read a lot of other miscellaneous comic books that aren't really that important to me, but I still read them just to kind of keep up with what's going on in that current universe, and that's where the comic loads will be coming in. But enough about that, let's go into the first comic book, Batman Beyond number 8. The art is done by Bernard Chang, and the story is done by Dan Jurgens. I like the series itself, and I love Tim Drake as being Batman. It's set in a very apocalyptic future where Neo-Gotham is the only city on Earth that still has a running society. The darkness in the series is great, but I'm not really getting into the story itself. I'm really trying hard. Tim Drake is my boy, and I love everything he's in. Unfortunately, though, the story is kind of difficult for you to follow along, especially if you're not really big into the storyline of the apocalyptic future of what's happening with Earth, Gotham, and all of the other cities. And Batman is becoming somewhat more of a savior in this as well, too. Which isn't bad, but it's not the greatest thing either. I like to keep him more in the shadows. I like to keep him as the guy who's somewhat more of like a myth and a legend, and unfortunately, that's not really in this comic book. Next is Star Wars number 14 and Darth Vader number 15. I'm loving all of the Star Wars titles that have come out. Lando Calrissian doesn't have the best plot going for it, but still, I do really get into it. The Vader Down storyline is focusing on Darth Vader's rival, who's also trying to go after Luke Skywalker. The storyline is great because Luke is trying to find one of the original Jedi temples, and the vast majority of all the Star Wars titles take place in between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. So we already know that there can't be too much development of Luke becoming a Jedi during this time frame. But there's still a lot of story that can happen here. One of the particular things that I'm really impressed with is we have other characters that are being introduced. We have an evil Wookiee called Black Chrysanthemum, who we get to see him fight Chewbacca in this issue. We also have a couple evil droids, almost like C-3PO's evil counterpart, who wants to kill people. The storyline is great. We get to see all of these characters meshing together more, plus we get a lot more development in their personalities, and even though the original trilogy did show that these characters cared about each other, the comic book is fleshing it out more and how they became much more of a family. Interesting ending to this storyline, and I have to say that Vader is such a cool character to read into. Midnighter number 8 came out, but that's a comic book that warrants its own video on its own, so I'll probably do that video later. Spider-Man Deadpool number 1. This was done by Joe Kelly and Ed McGuinness. Even though the Deadpool movie is going to be a huge hit, I'm not a big fan of his character in the comic books. With that being said, I do have to say that I laugh my ass off whenever I do read his character. Deadpool and Peter Parker Spider-Man were both Avengers for a short period of time, and now Deadpool's trying to buddy up with Spider-Man again. It hasn't been stated why he wants to do that. He's a total crazy nut, so maybe he just wants to do it because he's a crazy nut and he wants to be buddies with him. But the banter between these characters is hilarious. There's a certain point where Deadpool and Spider-Man are webbed together, and Deadpool's making it clear that them rubbing up against each other is turning him on. That all in its own probably made this comic book totally worth it. Totally Awesome Hulk number 2. This was written by Greg Pak and it was illustrated by Frank Cho. Amadeus Cho is the new Hulk. He has a completely different take on this as opposed to Bruce Banner. But he is a Hulk now, and he is vulnerable to the emotions of what happens to a Hulk. This issue he goes up against a character by the name of Lady Hellbender. She's trying to test him as to how powerful he really is, but she also has another agenda. Like most issues, it leaves off on a huge cliffhanger, and the next issue looks like it's going to be pretty badass. X-Men, Worst X-Man Ever, issue number 1 of 5. This was done by Michael Walsh. I read this originally thinking this is going to be a joke comic book, and it is. However, I do really believe it's going to end on a very sad, awful note. A teenage boy was introduced by the name of Bailey, and he found out that he has the X gene, so he has a mutant power. Unfortunately, though, it is probably the worst mutant power in the history of all mutant powers. And I don't mean a worthless superpower, it's a superpower that could be used. Unfortunately, though, if he uses it, it'll probably be the last time he uses it. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm not really sure if I'm going to continue on reading the comic book because I know the conclusion about what's going to end up happening. But hey, maybe I'll be surprised, I don't know. Finally, I got Uncanny X-Men number 1. Yes, they restarted again, let's move past it. This was written by Cullen Bunn and illustrated by Greg Land. The premise is that all the mutants on Earth are now in danger. Yeah, I know that's happened before, but in this instance, the Terrigen mist from the Inhumans has swept over most of the Earth, and it's made all of the mutants infertile. It's also killed a lot of them off, too. There's only small bands of mutants that are still active in the Marvel Universe. Magneto's the leader of this group, so already right off the bat, you know they're going to be a lot tougher. Also on this team is Psylocke, a mindless archangel, Monet, who is much more sexualized for some reason, and Sabretooth. Which, in a surprising twist, Sabretooth seems like he's much less bloodthirsty than Monet. A solid first issue. I love the artwork with this. We had the protagonists that were introduced, and we also have the antagonists antagonists, or at least a group of them, that it looks like they're going to be the villains for the next few issues. Maybe, sorta, kinda, I'm not really sure. They could throw us for a loop in a future issue. Anyways, regardless of that, this is my comic load for this week. Thank you guys for joining me in this video. What are you reading? Are you reading any of these comic titles, or are you reading something else? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, I'll join you guys later with another video very, very soon. Peace.